Okay, let's get started. All right, so today we are talking about what the heck is a blockchain? So we've got our CCE committee here. We're going to do intros in a second. I'll start with me. My name's Jessica Levesque. I'm the executive director at C4, and I'm excited for this stream because we are bringing it back to basics and actually even before basics. But let's start with intros. So, Josh, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, so I'm Josh McIntyre. I'm the CCE committee chairperson. I am a software engineer at Microsoft by day, who I'm not representing today. And I run a free and open source education project called ChainTuts. And I share lots of information about blockchains, cybersecurity, and computer science.
Awesome. Thank you, Josh. Serena?
Hi everyone, I'm Serena Charagundla. I Blockchain has always been so dear to my heart because I got into the space in 2011 as a high schooler. And so I've always just been super fascinated by it and have kept up to date with all the trends. And have also worked in the blockchain space as well. But my primary focus has been go-to-market strategy, specifically in emerging technology. So I specialize in making complex topics very digestible. And I'm also the founder of ArtRinks, which is an art app. But I love blockchain and I am excited to talk about some basics.
Very nice. 2011, when you were in high school. First of all, very impressed that you were into how blockchain tech works then. When I first heard about it, I was like, I'm not really that into it. It took a while for me to understand and to get into it, but I was also quite a bit older. So I was probably at the age of poo-pooing technology when I shouldn't have been. So, but then I finally got into it, fell down the rabbit hole, and I can't look away now. And I hope that that is what we provide in terms of information for those watching today. If you've heard of blockchain and you're wondering what a blockchain is or blockchain technology and how it all comes together, this stream is for you. It's really important, I think, to kind of back up. We've done a few streams where it's like back to basics, but I think sometimes basics are too advanced. And that's not because our listeners aren't smart, because you guys are. It's because there's so many technologies that have come together to create this new technology that if you're not familiar with all of the pieces, that it can be really confusing. At least that's how it was for me when I first started. So we're going to talk about what blockchain is, and not as a buzzword that we see thrown around, but really talk about like what are the problems it's supposed to solve, how does it work, where does your crypto live, and a few other things. So we've got an agenda on our end, and we're going to start going through. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. We will try to get to them as well. But a lot of the questions we're covering today are actually from the community or people who are potentially interested in the community but haven't been able to ask those questions yet. So some of what's guiding us is, Serena, questions that you asked some people in your life who are not involved in the technology. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, cool. So let's just start right off with, I guess, the big question of why we're here. What the heck is a blockchain? So I guess really, what's the point? Like, why are we excited about this technology and devoting so much of our time and energy to it? Josh, what's the point? If you say there isn't one and like turn off the screen, I'll cry. So,
There's definitely a point. Um, there's a lot that goes into an answer to the question of what is a blockchain. But here's where I like to start. In our day-to-day lives, when we do financial transactions, whether it's with a credit card or a bank transfer or Venmo or Cash App, there is a central institution that sits in the middle between ourselves and the person that we're sending money to. And that central authority determines that I have enough money to send to them and that that balance now belongs to the receiver at the end. And what blockchain is a way to mediate those transactions, to confirm transactions without having to have a central institution, a central trusted party in the middle between two people. So open blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum are what we call peer to peer. That means that for me to send money to Jessica or Serena, I can send it directly to them without having a bank or a government in the middle. Now, how it all works internally involves a lot more, but that's kind of the high level view of why we care about blockchain. Bitcoin was the first way that people could send value to each other in a peer-to-peer way without having to have a trusted third party in the middle.
I like that you brought that up, Josh, because we're so used to relying on that trusted third party. So even if I'm, giving you $1, Serena, right, there is somebody in the middle of that transaction who has said $1 means something, and it's the federal government, right? The reason that that works is because there's somebody else saying this is trusted. If I was just to give you a piece of paper I created, you probably wouldn't be as excited. Although with inflation, you probably wouldn't be excited over $1 anyhow. But the general idea still stands. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, Serena, in terms of this idea of removing trust from, keeping trust, but removing the middle individual or system?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also important to note the proof that's in there. So while there is trust, it does have a way of kind of like tracking itself and knowing where the transactions come from, who owns it. So there's also this concept of the proof of ownership. And so it's not just that are giving me $1, but it's, there's proof that you have the dollar to begin with. So I think that's really important to establish as well.
That's such a good point, because how do you know that I didn't just take it from somebody else and that it's going to have to be returned to them because I stole it in the first place, so it wasn't mine to give? So with blockchain technology, what we're doing is allowing a computer system, this program, to record this information and to track it and to create this trust without the human who was previously always responsible for creating this trust. Josh, did you want to add to that?
Well, it always depends on how deep we want to go with how that all works, right? I think a question that might be swimming around in people's heads right now was how can you do this peer to peer without just having fraud everywhere, right? People just making up that they're now billionaires. Well, we use cryptography, which is a specialized branch of mathematics designed around secrets and signatures and things like proof of ownership. And we have what we call consensus mechanisms. And that sounds really fancy and technical, but if you've ever heard of Bitcoin mining, proof of work, or Ethereum's proof of stake, what you need to know in this context is that those algorithms allow people to come to an agreement about what is true. So who owns what and who sent who what, right? That change of ownership that happens in a transaction. And it allows this to occur in a way that makes fraud difficult. So all of the different people on the network can agree on the same rule set and then therefore agree on the same set of transactions.
I love it. Oh, Serena, jump in.
I was just going to say, would you both agree with this? I know that we're talking about, being trustless right now. And I know that a big part of it is removing the trust from institutions and other people. But I feel like there is still this small component of trust, or even big, that is trust in the system, and like a trust in the rules that you're providing, or that have been provided on the blockchain. And that's kind of also what keeps the machine moving.
Mm-hmm. Well, interesting that you brought that up. And I think, Serena, you might have been in this call with our CEP, our Certified Ethereum Professional Committee, when we were asking the community about the word trustless. You were there, right?
Yeah, I was there.
So the question was, we've been using this word trustless for years, but it's starting to change in that we realize that the word trustless insinuates there's no trust in the system, where in reality, we're minimizing trust. So trust minimized. We're minimizing the trust of people and pushing it into computer programming. So instead of relying on the person who works at whatever bank to say, yes, this is correct, we're relying on the technology. Josh, what do
Yeah,
you think?
I think that's a really good way to put it. And what we're really doing when it comes to this shift of trust is we're taking trust away from one central point of failure, one central trusted institution that decides what the truth is, and shifting that to an entire group of people agreeing on what a rule set is. I think a really fun, simple analogy for this is think about common sports that people like to play. I'm a hockey fan. I've played hockey before. Um, yes, at the professional level, the NHL sets an agreed upon set of rules for professional teams. But people all over the world play hockey in recreational leagues and pond hockey and all these things. And the rules are all a little different. And what's really important is that the people that are coming together to play that game agree ahead of time as to what the rule set is. And if somebody starts throwing 3 pucks out on the rink and throwing them in the goal with their hands, everybody says, whoa, 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 that's not the rules, and it's come to by a community consensus rather than one sort of emperor of hockey deciding to change what the rules are.
Oh my God, as someone who's originally from Minnesota, best analogy ever talking about hockey. And, a moment ago, Josh, you were talking also about cryptography, and I feel like that can really apply to this example scenario as well. So, when you talk about cryptography, what that word is basically a way to keep a secret. So, it's the secret that's kept using technology. But in your case with hockey, if you were to tell your other teammates what's going on, how do you make sure that no one's going to be sharing that information? How do you know that nobody is a spy? Well, in technology, we've found this way to do that, to make sure that that information is kept private and can't be shared. And so we're not going to go into all of it, but there's a lot of technology involved in making sure that if we're talking about this hockey game, we don't have people secretly, texting the information to the other people across the game because you're a, dual player or whatever. Clearly, I'm not the one playing hockey with this example. I'm just going off of what you said. But I feel like that was a really good way to explain it. And this idea of consensus, people agreeing upon something in a informal way, but also is quite formal, because if somebody, does whatever you said with the puck, the other people would likely agree those aren't the rules. And so you have consensus, you're saying that doesn't count. And that's exactly what we see in blockchain technology. If you do an illegal move, the computer, the program, the ledger catches up to it and won't allow it. Go ahead, Serena.
I really like that analogy as well. I think it pertains to so much because I feel like a lot of the analogies that people typically use when they're trying to explain anything in blockchain is still financial, or is, somewhere more deep seated in technology and people don't really understand it. So I feel like that's really great and accessible to everyone to understand.
Yeah, just to take that further, if we're talking about this idea of proving something, we talk about, we're not going to get into super detail, but what we want to do is proof of ownership. So if we're talking about hockey, there's proof of who put the puck in the net, and everyone on the pond needs to agree to the fact that it was one team or another, and they then reach consensus over if it was made or not. And with technology, it's a lot easier because we don't have the people fighting over the, no, it actually hit this, or I didn't see it go in, because there's proof of it. Josh, you're the hockey person. What else can we add here that might help with the analogy more?
Well, I'm thinking even outside of hockey, just let's explain, sort of what it means to own crypto, because that's something that people, I think, get a little bit confused about. What does it mean to own a piece of Bitcoin? And does my Bitcoin or my Ethereum live on the blockchain? So, without getting too deep into the cryptography, blockchain uses something that we call public key cryptography. So instead of having one single secret, like a password turn into a key, we generate what we call a private key and a public key. Your private key is known only to you, and you can use your private key to prove your ownership of something that is associated with the public key without ever having to reveal it. That's kind of the cool, secret math behind public key crypto. So when somebody sent you some amount of Bitcoin. They send it on the blockchain, which stores which address, which is a public key, owns how much Bitcoin. So your public key might own half a Bitcoin. When you go to spend that, you can use your private key in your wallet to sign and verify ownership for everyone else on the network, proving I own that zero point 0.5 Bitcoin, and now I can send it to Serena. So I know that's getting into cryptography a little bit. Hopefully that's still accessible. But the interesting part is your keys don't live on the blockchain. That is what is stored in your wallet and should be kept secret by you. The only thing that actually lives on the blockchain, the public database that everyone shares and verifies, is essentially a ledger of which addresses own how much Bitcoin.
Okay, I think that was a really good overview of it. And I think that this is exactly why we're having this live stream, because everything you just said, Josh, I would consider like basic, but it's not really basic, because if I remove myself from what I know and revert back to, 10 years ago, if you were to say this, I would have been like, I'm sorry, what? So what we want to do is give you a little bit more information so that what Josh just said makes sense in the context of, I don't know, hockey, of Bitcoin, of whatever. So I feel like that was such a good way to get some of these terms out there, Josh. I'm glad that you said that, because those are the words that people who are watching this are likely hearing. You're hearing that everywhere, but you don't quite know how to put the pieces together, maybe, or at least I didn't when I started. So some of the terms that you used were wallet and keys and where these and addresses, right? So we're talking about some of these terms. Well, what we're really talking about is you able to prove that you own this Bitcoin, and how you do that, which is through what we call a key, and then where this lives. And Serena, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, just I
Please.
wanted to
Yeah.
just say that, I think Josh, you brought up a great point of how, these three pieces interact individually, or not interact together, but are individualized in their own senses. So, there's the wallet, there's the ledger, and there's the blockchain. And, the ledger is essentially kind of this record of truth that is maintained by the network, but also, you know, the wallet is the one that lets you interact with the ledger. And, maybe let me know if you agree with this, but I think a really great way of thinking about the wallet is kind of like a keychain. So it manages all of your keys. And with that, I just wanted to add like a PSA or asterisk that most or actually all non-custodial wallets, which we'll go into that as well, but they come with your secret code or your master key, essentially. And that is what you do not share. So I know, Josh, you were mentioning having a key that enables you to kind of sign this transaction. But I just want to clarify that that is not the key that we're talking about.
Yep. Yeah, and an analogy that I like to use, which isn't a perfect analogy, but I think helps folks understand this sort of idea of public key crypto at a useful level, is think about having a mailbox with a mail slot in it, but is locked with a key. So anybody can send you mail to your public mailbox, right? Anybody can walk by and drop a letter, or a note or a package in your slot, but only the person with the private key, the actual key on the key ring for that mailbox, can open it and get the packages. And so that's a rough sketch of what we're talking about with Bitcoin. You can share your public key, which is what we call an address, with anyone anywhere publicly. And nobody can use that to steal your Bitcoin. But only you with the private key can then spend the coins owned by that address.
Josh, your analogies are phenomenal.
Thanks. I try.
Agreed. And I was just putting into the YouTube chat that we at C4 have a free course that you can access, which is about hardware wallets. So we go into some of this information there from a more technical perspective, but also if you're interested in holding cryptocurrency, or you already have some and you want to figure out how to keep it secure, there's a free course on how to do that. So it goes into more detail about this private public key cryptography that we've tossed out there in a more practical sense as well. So check that out. Okay, so Serena, did you have something to add on to the analogy?
Yeah, I just wanted to, well, not necessarily to the analogy, but I just wanted to add just another, question that I had been asked was specifically about ledgers. And I know that there is a company called Ledger, and I think that sometimes creates some confusion for people. And so Ledger sells hardware wallets, which keep your keys offline. But that is not to be confused with the ledger that we're talking about on the blockchain.
That is such a good point. There are a number of companies out there that are using terms that are used in the technology. And so it becomes confusing, right? Ledger is a really good example of it. Coinbase is another example. When you say Coinbase, we think of the company, not what a Coinbase transaction is in the realm of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin specifically. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because often I think if you have the context that some of us do where we're, immersed in this, we're able to easily filter those terms out. But if you haven't heard of them before, how would you know if it's a company or the technology?
Yeah, absolutely. I also, I wanted to think of wallets as well, kind of like a window into the ledger, or kind of like just a window to see what your transactions are, what your current currency amount is that's, in your wallet. But that wallets don't necessarily function like a cash wallet, where if you give me $1, I don't have $1 in my wallet, but I have a transaction proof that I have a dollar in my custody.
Which is looking through the view. You can see that it is there, which is why it's comical when people say that Bitcoin is not transparent or cryptocurrency isn't transparent and we're all doing these illegal transactions. You can very easily see what's going in and out of a wallet and where it's going. And it's relatively easy to then track who owns that if you have the software, and there's a lot of software out there that allows for that to happen. So I think there's this misconception that it's all this super secret private transactions that there's no way to even keep track of, and that's not true at all. It's all public on this public ledger. This not the company, the technology, and on that ledger you're able to view pretty much what's going on. It won't say somebody's name attached to it, but a lot of times you're able to actually figure out who it is. Like if I was to send Josh money and then I was to send Serena money, and Josh was able to look at, and I said, oh, right out, just passing, I'm going to send Serena some money after I send it to you, Josh. He would be able to see that right after the account that sent him money sent somebody else money, and he might be able to figure out then, oh, that must belong to Serena. I know Serena does this, and he could track that as well. So anyways, I just think it's important to note that it is not, as muddy as I think some people might think in terms of knowing who owns what.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I also, oh, sorry.
I was going to say that was kind of a tangent. Please go.
I was just saying, since we're on the topic of wallets, I figured we might talk about custodial versus non-custodial wallets briefly before we moved on. But I know that, Jessica, you mentioned Coinbase. So Coinbase is a great example of a custodial wallet because they manage your keys. And so, for example, if you forget, it's account based. So let's say you forget your account login or any of your information, there is a way to recover it by using a third party, meaning Coinbase. But with a non-custodial wallet, you are kind of given your public keys, you're given your private keys, and you are the only one that can manage that. Which, going back to what we were saying earlier, I think I said, don't share that private key. So that is your key. That is your password to, your entire wallet. So it's very important to never give that out, never lose that. And so I just wanted to briefly touch on the differences between those two. If you have anything.
That's so important. One of them, you've got this third party that can help you access your funds because you're still using this person, this product, this company as the middleman. versus if you do it on your own, there is not that middle person, company, whoever, that's connecting for you. You become responsible for your secret information that allows you to access the cryptocurrency. Yeah. Okay, let's talk. So, anything else on the difference between types of exchanges, or do we want to get into decentralization a bit? Was there more on wallets that we feel like we didn't cover? Are we good? Okay. Let's go on to decentralization. So we talked about custodial and non-custodial, but there's also this idea of if something is centralized or decentralized. And this is a word that's used a lot. It's a buzzword. It's decentralized. It's centralized. Is it a centralized exchange or what? So let's talk about what we mean by that, because I think, again, this is one of those words that gets thrown around a lot, but there is a spectrum of what is centralized and decentralized. So, Josh, how would you explain the difference between these?
Well, to me, decentralization is somewhat a function of how many people are using the technology and how many people have a say in what that rule set is, right? We talked earlier about, everybody agrees to a rule set to use Bitcoin. And there's multiple parties that sort of agree to this rule set, right? There are the miners, which do the proof of work mining. There is software developers. There's people that run full nodes. There's just users in general, sort of what they want and what they speak about in the community. And the more stakeholders you have, the more decentralized that is. It's really about, is there a central point of failure, right? If all of the people using Bitcoin were in one locality in the world and that locality banned Bitcoin, maybe the one-off user across the world wouldn't be able to use it anymore. But there are so many different people using Bitcoin around the world and agreeing on this rule set that it's actually very, very difficult to sort of change the rules that Bitcoin operates with. Now, centralized, in contrast, is really, to me, is about having one or two very central points of failure. If we're all trying to send each other money and on a traditional financial system, and let's say Visa decides to ban all of us, then we're banned. We can't transact anymore. Whereas with Bitcoin, it's not really possible to do that because everybody agreeing to the rule set says you should be able to transact freely.
Yeah, I think this is a really good way to explain it. And going back to the hockey example, if you think about like a centralized game versus a decentralized game, I see you nodding, Serena. Do you want to go into this analogy or do you want me to? You want me to
Go
try?
ahead, go ahead. I was
Okay.
thinking the same thing though.
Okay, well, let's see if we can get through this together. So if there's this, pond hockey and they're like, oh yeah, let's start at 7. And then someone else says, no, I won't be able to finish dinner in time. I can't do it until whatever. And you arrange the time. You all show up. So far, this is decentralized, right? You're there. And then you agree upon the rules as a group together. There's no person saying, no, this is the rule. You're deciding. You then operate as your own referees at the game. Did that count or not? Well, 5 people think it did, 20 people think it didn't. Let's go with it didn't because we're reaching consensus through this decentralized group. How am I doing so far?
Yeah,
I
that
think
was
that's
great.
I think that's
Okay.
great.
So
I
then
was
the opposite. No, go ahead, Serena.
I was just going to add that also anyone in that game can also verify the rules,
Yes.
and
Yep.
not one single referee can dictate how the rule might change or anything like that either.
Yeah, it's like a pickup game. You're deciding what the rules are. This is like neighborhood games as kids when you all come together. And in that context, normally someone goes home crying because they're mad, but maybe that's because they're the liar for agreeing on consensus. So that would be decentralized. Centralized was if you look in the community newspaper and it says we have a game from at 6 p.m. You can attend. Here are the rules. You go to that and there's a referee and you say, no, I don't think that was actually a goal. And the referee says, well, too bad because I'm in charge. It was a goal. That's the end of it. So that's kind of the difference between having a say, a vote, being able to participate in something versus joining something where the rules are decided. And honestly, as we're talking about this, it seems obvious like, well, we want to make our own rules up. But sometimes you don't want to make your own rules up. Sometimes you don't want to be this group of people that has to determine everything. You don't want to deal with the infighting. You don't want to deal with, this one person who always starts crying because they're, what they want the rules to be aren't made. So there are places for centralization, I think, but the cool thing about blockchain technology is we found a way where there's like people aren't going home crying. They get their opinion out there. They're choosing to opt into this really well-formed, well-formulated system. How was that for a rant? Any comments on it? I clearly really like this technology.
Yeah, it was
Same.
great.
All right. Any other thoughts on centralization or decentralization? Do we want to do any other examples?
Well, I wanted to kind of just pitch a question to the group here. But I know sometimes centralization and decentralization are more so known as a spectrum. And maybe Josh, you can say more on this, but what does that mean? What is the spectrum? And how do you land somewhere between instead of one or the other?
Good
Yeah,
question.
thank you for reminding this of us because I know we talked a bit in the pre-stream about this idea. This is something that I really like to speak about when it comes to blockchains, right? Because people sometimes in this space talk about centralization versus decentralization as sort of an offer on thing, a very binary thing. In reality, in my opinion, decentralization is a spectrum because, on one very centralized end, you could have a system that literally relies on one company deciding what the truth is, right? If our entire financial system was built on us sending money back and forth over Cash App or Venmo, that company, that payment processor is the source of truth, and whatever they decide is the case about your balance, about your ability to transact, if you're banned on the platform. On the other hand, we have a system like Bitcoin where there are so many different and varied stakeholders, hundreds of thousands of users, millions of users across the entire globe, all with different legal systems and different opinions. Very, very difficult to make changes to the Bitcoin protocol because it's frankly just hard to get everyone to agree or to get a majority to agree, right? But there's also a middle because there are blockchains that have very small communities or smaller communities, right? Um, think of we've all sort of heard of thousands of cryptocurrencies. There might be a crypto that is decentralized in the sense that, it's a peer-to-peer blockchain, but there's only about 1,000 people using it. And so, and maybe only 3 people have all the computing power to do the mining. So they can start to manipulate things in their favor if they want to, because there's not enough variation in the amount of people using it and who has sort of the resources. Um, so, this is it's a complicated topic, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, I feel like that was a really good way to explain how it's not necessarily one way or the other, right? There's going to be differences between, and I'm sure anyone who, heard this hockey example can think there's a difference between a pickup game and an NHL game. There's a variety in between the super organized, formulated, centralized authority that decides and a few kids that are running around making up their own rules, right? We've got this big gap. Those things are very different, but there's this middle ground. I think that is exactly what you were saying, Josh. So anything else we want to talk about with decentralized versus centralized, or should we go on to the next question?
I did just want to add, Josh, when you were mentioning that, in earlier days that it was more centralized than decentralized, I just kind of wanted to touch on, why you might have said that, and feel free to expand on this. But my thought behind it would be, because there's a smaller group of people, it becomes more centralized. But then once more and more people are using that blockchain, that's what kind of also solidifies the decentralization, because then you don't know who's who, you don't know what's happening, and that kind of expands on it. Would you say
Yep.
that's fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of
Mhm.
it has to do with community consensus, right? And the bigger of a community you have, the more people you sort of have agreeing on the rules, sometimes the harder it can be to change them, right? Um, an example that many of us are probably familiar with career wise is, small startups tend to move a lot faster and make bigger changes than, you know, global 200,000 employee Fortune 500 companies, right? It's just harder to steer that cruise ship than it is a kayak. Um, and, that's, I think, a reasonable analogy for what consensus is like with these open blockchains.
Mhm. Well, and when we're talking about open blockchains, most people probably have heard of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the most well-known blockchain that is out there, I think. Would you guys agree with that? If most people have heard
I'd
of
agree.
blockchain and Bitcoin, and then from there, maybe less. So is blockchain the same as Bitcoin, Serena? Yes or no? I'm just
No.
turning this into test hour. But let's talk about why they are different. Who wants to jump in about that?
I could jump in.
Okay.
So blockchain is kind of this underlying technology, right? And so Bitcoin is one of the networks using that technology. And so a lot of times when people even think of crypto as well or cryptocurrency, they still, go straight to Bitcoin. I almost made the mistake of switching them myself. But it is different. And Bitcoin, still follows the same rules and the same system, but it is, a very widely used currency on the blockchain.
And there are differences between the different types of blockchains. And even under that, there are more categories. So, another really frequently heard of blockchain is Ethereum. And Ethereum exists separately than Bitcoin, but it definitely has some of the same properties that Bitcoin has, in that the founder, the creator of Ethereum, loved Bitcoin and created something similar, but that does different things. And so then we've seen all of these other cryptocurrencies and blockchains be created based upon maybe these initial fundamentals, but they are tweaked and changed based on what the needs are of the users. I think some of us would say that in our opinions, and this is just in general, not every blockchain is created equally. We all have different opinions on what are the most important pieces of different blockchains. But if someone says, I own blockchain, that doesn't make any sense. What we try to do is put an article in front of it that's a blockchain, not the blockchain. So that I think is a lot of confusion when they say the blockchain. It's kind of like saying the cloud. Well, the cloud isn't this one piece of technology. A cloud exists, a lot of different clouds exist. So I think because we say the internet, the cloud, the whatever, we start to assign that same way of speaking to blockchain technology. But there is not a blockchain. There are many blockchains, and Bitcoin happens to be one of them. Ethereum happens to be one of them. But the technology, the underlying technology, blockchain technology, is what is used for each of these different blockchains.
Yeah,
Any thoughts?
exactly. Yeah, blockchain is just a tool, right? Blockchain is a component of open peer-to-peer systems like Bitcoin or Ethereum. But I think it is really important to make that distinction, right? There is no the blockchain. There is a lot of different blockchains that aren't compatible and don't interact with one another, right? There is the Bitcoin blockchain, the Ethereum blockchain, the Litecoin blockchain. There even can be private blockchains that they don't sort of exist in this open peer-to-peer sense the way these currencies do. You could use a blockchain to help solidify your supply chain, for example, where maybe you have 50 companies working together to sort of have like a chain of custody for their supply chains, right? That's can be a little easier to manipulate than something like the Bitcoin blockchain, but it serves a particular purpose. It's just a
Mhm.
tool that we can use to build these peer-to-peer technologies without just sort of having a centralized database like Venmo has for who owns what.
Go ahead, Serena.
I also, Jessica, I think you were mentioning that there are like major differences, and I think to a lot of people, people kind of associate Bitcoin with um, specifically cryptocurrency, and then Ethereum, even though it is a cryptocurrency, is typically associated more with kind of like startups and entrepreneurship. And I think, just as an example, I just used those two. But for Bitcoin, I think it's typically the consensus is typically to have minimal changes to that blockchain. And so I think, with Ethereum, because it has all these smart contracts, it's easier to iterate on those. It provides more flexibility to people, and that is kind of why Ethereum had become, such a big blockchain to use for startups as well.
Because they differ, they use, they're there for different use cases as well. And so that sometimes becomes contentious between people that are in the community and are using the technology with different opinions for what's better for what. And that's the same with any technology, though. There's always going to be some people who are Android users and some people that are iPhone users. There's just different needs that are being met by these. And I think that that's okay. In fact, I think that's a really good thing. If after Bitcoin was created, that was the end of it, nothing else was created. This is my personal opinion. And I would say that C4 also stands by this because we also have an Ethereum committee and an Ethereum exam, that there are other needs that can be met using blockchain technology. So Bitcoin, amazing for peer-to-peer transactions. It is very focused on that. When we want to do something like supply chain tracking, we wouldn't use Bitcoin. We would use the Ethereum blockchain or another one. Josh, did you want to jump in? I couldn't
Yeah,
tell if you
exactly.
would. Yeah.
I love that, right? Because that's why these different blockchains exist, right? The founder of Ethereum really likes Bitcoin, but wanted to do some things that the rest of the community didn't have buy-in for. And so, since this technology is open, right, he was able to go off and start a new thing, right? Circling back to that hockey analogy, right? There's a very specific rule set for the highest levels of competitive hockey, right? In the National Hockey League. But folks like me that are software engineers that want to go play with some friends, we don't want to get lit up all the time like professional hockey players do. So, we have our own rule set where you can't check, right? So you're allowed to go off and make a blockchain that fits your own needs. And the real question is do I have other people that want to use it?
Mm-hmm. One real quick example that I just think is useful in terms of understanding how Bitcoin is different than Ethereum, which are the two biggest blockchains that people hear about. So I said Bitcoin, something where we do peer to peer. So if I wanted to pay somebody, I'm probably going to use Bitcoin. That there are caveats there, right? There's different types of currencies, and actually I'm not going to go into this, but Ethereum can also be used for that, and there are different currencies that exist within the Ethereum ecosystem that can also be used for transactions. But the original purpose of Bitcoin was peer-to-peer transactions, and the original purpose of Ethereum was to be able to enable this technology and other technologies to do really cool things. Like EY used a blockchain, and this was a couple years ago, in order to track Peroni beers when it was created, how it moved, like where the grains went, where the bottles went, all this stuff on a ledger. Now, what they used was a private ledger, which we also might say permissioned, meaning that I couldn't just decide, oh, well, I'm going to start creating my own beer and add this to this blockchain and whatever else that I decide to do. It was what we call permissioned. You needed to have permission to do this. Now, once you gain permission, you're able to have some freedom within, but this is very different than when we're talking about Bitcoin, in which we're saying that it is used for this one purpose generally. And so I think it's just important to understand that part of the reason why there are multiple different blockchains, many blockchains, is because of the use cases and what they can provide. And part of that comes down to whether you need permission to participate like with what I was just saying with this permission blockchain that EY was using. Or if there's no permission, which would be permissionless, like Bitcoin, where I can be involved, Serena can be involved, Josh can be involved, you can be involved, anybody can be involved. So there's this different part of the spectrum. And then there's also the middle part, which is hybrid. Do you guys want to explain this further? I'm not sure what I missed. Anything else you want to cover with the differences in these types of permissions?
I think you covered it really well.
I agree.
Okay, so Bitcoin is not blockchain, and there are different types of blockchains. And we're not talking about technology that just suddenly appeared. We're talking about a lot of technologies that have existed for a long time that have come together to create these new technologies, which then have had these spin-offs. So if you're watching this or you're learning about it and you're like, this is so confusing, yeah, it is. You're not alone. You're still smart. It's just there's so many pieces to it. And like we've devoted so many hours of our lives, days, months, years to learning this stuff. So we're going to, go through a few more things, but I just say keep in mind that for all of us on this call, we didn't just instantly know everything either. And it takes a while to understand new technologies. And it takes even longer if you don't understand the technologies yet that come together to create this new technology. So there's just a lot to learn and understand. Serena, what else did you want to say?
Well, I wanted to say I loved that you mentioned that it's just been over the course of so much time, because I think when people think of, people who are in the blockchain space, they assume that they just kind of know everything because they've been in it. And I think it's so funny because I've gone to so many conferences as well, and they're kind of split off into different sections. Like, for example, DeFi or NFTs or, just, various things. And I think it's so funny because if you actually talk to people at each of those, sectors, they will have absolutely no idea what's going on with the other one. And so it's really just a snowballed learning. And you just keep going. But I wouldn't say that I feel that I like there's still so much to learn despite having keeping up to date in the industry for so long. Like there's still so much I learn every single day.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that everyone's just learning in the space. Nobody is an expert. I mean, we are, but not we, but not that we're
Yeah, but we're experts in certain areas. And then when we put it all together, do I know everything about every protocol out there? No, that is absolutely unreasonable to think. I would believe that nobody is able to know it because there's so much to know. But that's the awesome thing. Like that, I've been in this full time for 9 years, and I still learn something almost every day. Different things that connect to all of this. It's fascinating, which I think is what makes it so fun and so frustrating, but then so fun because you figure it out and on and on. You have to really love the technology, but because it's become so widespread, it's so important. Even if you don't leave this live stream thinking, oh my God, I'm going to become, obsessed with Bitcoin. I got to do all this research. At least when other people are talking about it, you have a high level idea of what it is that they're saying, and you can participate in the conversation in as far as maybe even just asking questions to learn more.
Asking the right questions makes a big difference, right? Um, I've been in this industry as well for well over 10 years. And, I come from a computer science background, so I'm highly interested in how the underlying protocols work, security concerns, cryptography, and all the time people ask me fantastic questions where even having this deep knowledge base, I just scratch my head and I'm like, I'm gonna need to get back to you. I need to think about this. I need to chew on it. I need to do some research, right? What a fun question, especially interacting with my viewers. And so if you're watching this stream and you're still a little confused as to what a blockchain is, pick something that you did understand really well from the stream and run with it, right? Start asking some new questions. And, now there's so much good free information out there that you can learn some new things.
Yeah, I think that maybe what we should do with our last time is to go over some of the terms that we've talked about and just kind of remind you where we started, because we started with the question, what the heck is a blockchain? And from there, we started to talk about what's the point of it? Why does this even exist? The fact that it didn't just materialize out of thin air, a lot of things came into it. We talked about how blockchain technology removes a centralized authority in some ways, depending on what protocol. So real quick, we started with this hockey example, right? Was that the first? That was where we started to begin with, right? So to bring it back full circle to that, we were talking about how you can get a group of people together or a group of technology and be able to make decisions in a way where the game moves forward. There's not these constant stops. How do we agree on something, come to consensus so that the game is pushed forward, so that the transaction actually goes through? What we're doing is we're reducing that infighting. I'm sure we all did pickup games when we were younger as kids, and there was not consensus. There was that screaming, I'm going to go split my, do my own game. And well, that happens in crypto too. People disagree and they split, but if you do agree, you can stay and, reach consensus for it. So the point of it is to be able to come up with ways to agree without a centralized authority, basically, is how it all started. We talked a little bit about wallets and where crypto lives. I think, and you guys let me know if you agree, this is the most confusing part of what we talked about. Do you guys think so?
I would agree with that. And I think, in most of the questions that people have asked me, um, just over the last decade or more, I think most of the frustration and confusion has come from the wallet, ledger, and blockchain, and just differentiating those three.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this one's tough, right? Because, most of what we're used to interacting with in traditional finance is sort of analogous to like a symmetric type of encryption, which I know that's a little bit more technical than this stream. But basically, you have a shared secret that everybody agrees on, right? The bank issues you a credit card number, and you just give that to the merchant when you want to buy something. Um, and sometimes they get leaked, and then people buy stuff with your credit card, and you have to cancel it and do all these things. Whereas public asymmetric cryptography that we're using for blockchains is more like that mailbox slot with the key. There's something that you always keep secret, and people can send you value without having to reveal anything private. So there's a lot that goes into that. I would definitely encourage folks to look up some of those terms if you're still confused. And like I said, I'm a computer science person, so it was confusing to me at one point too. Um, it's a tough one.
Well, and I think part of it is often there's this expectation when you start to learn about a new technology that you're supposed to just understand it and be able to use it. And that's not the case. Let's say you wanted to start using Adobe Photoshop, that's nothing to do with cryptocurrency. You can't just turn on your computer, download the software, and you're good to go and understand how to use it all. There are so many different pieces to it. But you've got this purpose, this goal. Maybe you take courses to understand, you play around. The challenge is when we're talking about cryptocurrency and using these blockchains in order to play around, we've got money involved. It's very different than if you've got a picture from Christmas and you look like you're, missing half your face and you want to fix that. And okay, whatever, it's just this internal thing you're doing. And there's a difference between that and actually involving your own money, your life savings, your whatever it is. It doesn't matter if it's an hour of your time. As soon as we bring in money, it becomes scary because it matters. You put your time, but also it's something that you can't necessarily get back. So I think the point is that you need to take some time to understand this. And there are ways to get involved and use the technology and not have it be really scary. You don't have to start with something that's really complex, like all, the types of cryptography and the types of wallets. You can go on and create an account using a centralized authority and become an active member of this. Be careful what you use. Just be very aware that there are different levels of security, but you can start to dabble in it, use a very small amount of money, or maybe you don't want to do anything with the money side, but you want to understand how NFTs work or blockchain based games. There's all these different things happening. But I would say that you don't need to understand everything to get involved. None of us understand everything in crypto. It's impossible. So just start out exploring in a safe way. And you'll hear a lot of people saying, like, if it's not this, then it doesn't matter. You have to do this or that. You get to decide what works for you and play around and have fun with it, I think. That's the best way to learn, I think, is just exploring the technology. What do you think, Serena?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think safety in numbers as well. When you mentioned to be careful about what you're using, I think anything that is widely accepted is likely a great place to start, instead of something that you haven't heard of. It's unlikely that something you haven't heard of is widely accepted at this point.
That is such a good point. Use the popular things right now. Go and look. I mean, if you want to download a wallet to play around and there's 3 people who have given reviews on it, that's not the right wallet. Pay attention to what you're downloading and that kind of a thing when you play around. There's also a ton of free resources out there. If you're not familiar with, I'll just quickly say Jameson Lopp has a website called lopp.net, and he has tons of free resources on how you can start to pick out a wallet. Where do you even go? Josh has an incredible amount of information on Chain Toots. He's got a YouTube channel. He also has a book. There's just tons of places you can go to get information that is free. And I did say Josh has a book which you can buy, but when I say free, I mean it. He's got it on GitHub and you can actually read it for no cost. So we're talking about people who really want this technology to succeed, and you can find this info online. Okay, we are now at the point where we've got 50 more things we could cover, but we've already gone for an hour. And why don't we do like closing things we missed, and then we can talk about perhaps doing a follow-up stream, live stream on some of the other things that we didn't get to. What else do you guys want to point out there? I know we're at time.
Yeah, I'll just second some things that Serena and Jessica talked about. Just be careful if you're diving into this technology. Security is challenging with something that is so powerful. Start small, start with small amounts of money, of course. Work at a level of risk and a level of interest that is appropriate for you. A lot of people are very passionate about this technology. And you may hear folks say you should put your whole life savings in Bitcoin and put the keys on a hardware wallet and bury 3 copies at the edges of the earth. And it's okay to slow down, just explore and use it in a way that makes sense for you. Like I enjoy playing music and I am nowhere near at the level of an esteemed musician, but I get to have fun, do it in a way that works for me. Um, it's the same with blockchain, right? You don't have to dump your whole life into it. You can start by just creating an account on exchange and buying $1 worth and sending it around.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, Josh, you mentioned music. There are so many use cases with this that I guarantee that if, you're trying to figure out what you want to dive into, there's likely something that already exists based on your own interests as well. So you don't even necessarily need to like buy Bitcoin, per se, but you can just kind of dabble into what the music industry, for example, is doing with blockchain at the moment, and just kind of exploring it that way based on your interests.
Yeah, and Serena, I love that when you started talking about one of your own projects, your company, you said, how did you explain it from a high level? It's I don't think you use blockchain like NFT. You didn't say anything like that, right? You explained it as art.
Yes. So it's an emerging tech art platform. So it's for artists that are in the emerging art space, as well as people who are art curious. And there will be some blockchain compatibility as well, but that is not really the selling point of it. It just exists at the same time.
Which is exactly where we want blockchain technology to go. Eventually, we should be using it and not even necessarily aware of it. When you streamed this, you weren't thinking, well, I'm on the internet, okay, my IP protocol, or like you don't go through all those things. Don't listen to what I just said about that. But in general, you're not thinking of each step as you go through. It just becomes part of it, right? And that is what I think blockchain technology is doing, and why Serena is able to talk about her project without you needing to understand what a consensus mechanism is. And that's where we're going with this. But it's pretty cool to understand the underlying technology, at least to a degree. I think we'll probably do a follow-up where we talk about the different types in more detail. And if you've got questions that came up from this or that we didn't address, but you still have, let us know. We are happy to do more of this. This entire stream came from questions that we've all heard already, and in particular that Serena asked around and got. So we're used to these questions, and we know that there are more. Josh?
Yeah, I'll second that. I'll not to just promote my own stuff, right? But Chaintute's available, everything's open source, and I'm generally pretty accessible. So if you use a contact forum on my website or you leave a comment under my videos, I do really try to answer those. And I love when people pose interesting questions that make me scratch my head. Um, everybody around here loves to help people understand this. So, don't be a stranger. If you need help with something that you can't find an answer to, try reaching out. And folks generally love to help.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining. I just saw in the chat that someone was asking about a question, and so I'm sorry we didn't get to it. Please send it to us. You can send it to us through our LinkedIn or go to our website, and you're able to submit questions and comments there. So let us know. We're all about education. Thank you guys for joining, anyone who's watching. And Serena and Josh, thank you for sharing your brains with us today. I really appreciate it. And we'll see you guys next time. Appreciate it. Bye.